warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Naila M. Abdul Kadir from the Group 1. Our topic for today is all about Introduce to History. Introduce history, learning objective. To understand the meaning of the history as an academic discipline, and to be familiar with the underlying philosophy and methodology of the discipline. To apply the knowledge in historical methodology and philosophy is assessing and analyzing exacting historical narrative. To undermine and assess critically and value of the historical values and source. To appreciate the importance of history in the social and national life of the history. This chapter introduced history as a discipline and a narrative. It presents a difference of history which transcend and common definition of history as a study of the past. Definition and subject matter. History has always been known as a study of the past. Student and general education often treat and subject for its notoriety in requiring them to memorize date, place, names, and events. From the distant eras, this slow appreciation of the discipline may be roots from the shallow understand of the history relevance to their lives to their respective contexts. Well, the popular definition of history as a study of the past is not wrong. It does not give justice to the complexity of the subject and its importance to human civilization. The subject matter history is the life of people and humanity. To catch hold and express in word. To describe directly the life of single people, let alone the whole of humanity, is buying possibility. History is a study of the past, particularly people and events of the past. History is the pursuit common to all human societies. Human beings have always been interested in the past. In the past, for many reasons, history was derived from the Greek word history, which means knowledge. Acquired through inquiry on investigation, history, the study of the past event.
So, my topic is all about questions and issues in history. So indeed, history as discipline has already turned into a complex and dynamic inquiry. So, ang dynamic inquiry is hindi siya pwede mag-produce sa perspective on the discipline regarding sa mga different questions like what is history, why study history, and history for whom. So, those questions can be found by historiography. So, in simple terms, historiography is history of history. Historiography and history are same. So, it talks about past, the happened about past, and such of events. Historiography is important for someone who studies history because it teaches the students to be critical in the lesson of history presented. Learning from the past can be used to make sense of the present. Learning of past mistakes can help people to not repeat them. Being reminded of a great past can inspire people to keep their good practices to move forward. So, syempre lahat naman tayo. Past is kahapon, present is today, and the future is tomorrow. So, to be exact, kunwari may nagawa tayong mali sa kapwa natin yesterday or the past, may realization tayo, and learnings, of course. Kapag may learnings or realization tayo, minsan na-realize natin or may konsensya na sana hindi natin nagawa. Ganun. Positivism. Ito yung school na pinag-merge yung 18th century and 19th century. So, it requires observable evidence para maklaim yung mga knowledge na totoo. Positivism also entails an objective means of arriving of a conclusion. In a discipline of history, the mantra, no document, no history, stems from this very same truth. Positivist historians are also expected to be objective and impartial not just in their arguments, but also on their conduct of historical research. Noong unang kasaysayan, kahit anong history gaya ng paturo or pasulat is palagi pa rin nilang inilalayon ito sa grupo ng mga audiences. Ang mga ilustrados nito ay sila Jose Rizal, Isabela de los Reyes, and Pedro Paterno. Gusto nila na mailayon ito sa Spaniards para ma-realize nila na ang mga Pilipino ay matatalino. So, nung Amerika na yung nagtanghal sa Pilipino, so parang wala lang daw parang walang sense yung pinapahayag ng mga Pilipino, tapos ayun, ikinalat nila to sa kanilang kapwa Amerikano at gusto nila na mawala yung kapangyarihan ng Pilipino or gusto nila pababain yung kapangyarihan ng Pilipino at pabagsakin ito.
History and the historian. If history is written with agenda or is heavily influenced by the historian, it is possible to come up with an absolute historical truth. Is history an objective discipline? If it is not, it's still worthwhile to study history. This question have haunted historians for many generations. Lagi itong tanong ng mga historian or mananalaysay. Kasi, unang-una, masaya ba silang gawin ang mga bagay na to? At ang pinakatanong is, kikita ba sila dito? But indeed, maaaring yayaman ka dito because an exact and accurate history of the past is impossible for the very simple reason that we cannot go back to the past. Hindi natin ma-access ang past indirectly as your subject matter, but only historian can access the representative of the past through historical sources and evidence. Therefore, it's the historian job not just to seek historian evidence and facts, but also to interpret these facts. Ang mga historian or mananalaysay ay hindi lang paghahanap ng ebidensya ang kanilang trabaho o ginagawa, kailangan din nilang ipaliwanag ang mga nakuha nilang ebidensya because facts cannot speak for themselves. Trabaho nilang bigyang kahulugan o meaning ang katotohanan and to organize them into a timeline, establish causes, and write history. Historical research requires rigor, means kailangan curious ka na malaman ang katotohanan. Kailangan malakas ang loob mong alamin at hindi ka magsasawang alamin ang mga nakaraan. Historian methodology comprises certain techniques and rules that historian follows in order to properly utilize sources and historical evidence in writing history. Ang mga historian ay may mga pamamaraan ng pag-aaral ng kasaysayan. Kailangan mateknik ka, may kaalaman, mapamamaraan at sumusunod sa batas para magamit ng tama ang mga sources. For example, is an historian choose to use an oral account as his data in studying the ethnic history of the Ifugaos in the Cordilleras during the American occupation, he needs to validate the claims of his informant through comparing and corroborating it with the written sources. Kung ang sabi-sabi ay tumutugma sa written sources, maaaring totoo ito at maaari siyang ma-validate bilang mga ebidensya. Itong mga sabi-sabi ng mga tao na nandun mismo sa pangyayari. Kaya napakahalaga sa isang historian na may interes sa kanyang ginagawa because historian is always motivated in knowing the truth in history.
Historical sources are the main way that we can interact with and understand more about past events. Learning from history is very important. as it helps us to work out how we got here. We have two types of historical sources, the primary and the secondary sources. The primary sources in the study of history as an academic discipline, primary sources are also called an original source or the first hand. Some examples of it are artifacts, documents, diary, manuscript, autobiography, video recording, actual interviews, or any other source of information that was created at the time under the study. Secondary sources were created by someone who did not experience firsthand or participate in the events or conditions you are researching. For historical research projects, secondary sources are generally about books and articles. Secondary sources can include academic books, journal articles, speeches, reviews, research reports, essays, and textbooks. Secondary sources are important because they can serve as guides in primary sources. Para mas maunawaan pa ang kahulugan ng primary at ng secondary sources, ito ang pagkakaibang. The primary sources is original material from the time period under investigation, or the first hand or the origin of the information, while the secondary sources is something that relates to or demonstrate the primary sources. Secondary sources interprets and analyzes primary sources to validate and criticize the information of the data sources. Here is the internal criticism. The internal criticism is applied to check the credibility of the document, whether the contents given in it are believable or not. However, the historian has to scrutinize carefully the records that appear given as authentic. Internal criticism involves a scientific examination of the relevance of the data. Internal criticism is when you have to prove that the document is what it says it is. For example, if the document in question are results letter, you ask if the handwriting was a result. You have to criticize if the writing came from results.